story. Vince Levine's grip tightened on his coffee mug as he watched his wife Beatrice scroll through her phone at the breakfast table. Her thumb moved with practiced precision, the screen angled away from him. A habit she developed over the past 6 months. The rich aroma of his morning coffee turned bitter in his mouth as he observed her subtle smirk, quickly masked when she noticed his attention. "Another message from your meditation group?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral despite the ice in his veins. 20 years of marriage had taught him to read her tells, and lately, they were screaming at him. Beatrice looked up, her perfectly manicured fingers still clutching her phone. "Just checking the schedule for next week's retreat," she replied, her voice honey-sweet. "The group's really helping me find my center, Vince. You should try it sometime." He smiled, not letting it reach his eyes. As a psychology teacher who'd spent decades studying human behavior, he recognized the deflection technique. "Maybe I will," he lied smoothly, "though my students keep me busy enough. Speaking of which, how's the book club going?" A flicker of something, tension, worry, crossed her face before she recovered. "Oh, wonderful. We're reading this fascinating novel about marriage and identity. Very modern take on relationships." Vince nodded, filing away her micro-expressions for later analysis. The book club met every Wednesday, coincidentally the same evening his former best friend Toby Hayes held his office hours in the English department. The synchronicity hadn't escaped his notice. Their daughter Katie's smiling face caught his eye from the family photo on the wall, a reminder of happier times. She was away at college now, leaving him alone to notice the growing distance between him and Beatrice. The late-night phone calls she took on the balcony, speaking in hushed tones. The new password on her phone, changed monthly like clockwork. The meditation retreats where cell service mysteriously vanished. "I've got a surprise for you," Beatrice announced, interrupting his thoughts. She reached into her designer handbag, another recent acquisition, and pulled out an elegant envelope. Vince accepted it, noting the thickness of the paper, the gold embossing. Inside was an invitation to the Four Seasons Resort in Maui. His eyes scanned the details while his mind calculated the cost, remembering their recent conversations about budget constraints when he'd mentioned visiting Katie at college. 20 years deserves something spectacular, Beatrice said, her handwritten note elegant on the accompanying card. "I have news that will change everything." He met her gaze, searching for the woman he'd married 2 decades ago. Her smile was picture-perfect, practiced, like everything else about her these days. But her eyes were calculating, measuring his reaction. "This is unexpected," he said, maintaining his composure. "What made you choose Maui? Don't you remember our honeymoon dreams? We always talked about Hawaii." She reached across the table, touching his hand. Her wedding ring caught the light. Recently cleaned, he noticed, though she claimed to have lost her ring cleaner months ago. "That's thoughtful of you," he replied, squeezing her hand while his mind raced. "When do we leave?" 3 weeks from Saturday. I've already cleared it with Principal Matthews." Her efficiency was telling. She'd arranged everything without consulting him, just like the meditation retreats. Later that night, after Beatrice had gone to bed, Vince sat in his home office, surrounded by photo albums. Katie's childhood beamed up at him. Her first bike ride, family vacations, graduation day. He paused at a photo from 5 years ago, a family barbecue where Toby Hayes stood beside them, arm around his then-wife Dawn, all smiles and friendship. His phone buzzed, a text from Katie. "Hope you're doing okay, Dad. Mom mentioned you've been quiet lately. You know you can talk to me, right?" Vince's jaw clenched. The subtle manipulation was clear. Beatrice was laying groundwork, painting him as withdrawn, possibly unstable. He'd seen similar tactics in troubled families at school, never imagining he'd be on the receiving end. He opened his laptop, pulling up his private journal, encrypted, stored on a secure cloud service. For months, he'd documented every inconsistency, every lie, every subtle change in Beatrice's behavior. As a psychology teacher, he understood the importance of patterns. As a husband, he refused to be blindsided. A new email notification popped up, Toby Hayes, regarding next week's department meeting. The sight of his name made Vince's blood run cold. He clicked delete without reading it, then opened his browser to research the Four Seasons Maui. 20 years of marriage had taught him patience. 3 weeks would give him plenty of time to prepare for whatever Beatrice was planning. He pulled out his phone, composing a carefully worded text to his sister Carol. Need to talk? Coffee tomorrow? Then he began making notes about the invitation, analyzing every detail. The pieces were there. He just needed to assemble them correctly. The house creaked around him as he worked, the sounds of his life with Beatrice fading into background noise. In their bedroom above, she slept peacefully, probably dreaming of Maui. But Vince Levine hadn't survived 20 years teaching troubled teens by being naive. If his wife wanted to play games, she'd learn he was a master strategist hiding behind a teacher's gentle facade. He closed the photo album, locking it away with the invitation. Tomorrow, he'd begin his own preparations. After all, he had news that would change everything too. The forgotten laptop charger seemed insignificant when Vince first realized he'd left it in his classroom. He could have waited until morning, but something, instinct, perhaps, or fate, drove him back to school that evening. The parking lot was nearly empty, the security lights casting geometric patterns across the asphalt. Then he saw it, Toby Hayes' silver Audi, parked in its usual spot outside the English department. Vince killed his engine, sitting in darkness as his mind raced through possibilities. Toby often worked late, especially on Wednesdays. But something pulled Vince from his car, drew him toward the English wing with silent steps. Years of walking these halls had taught him which doors squeaked, which floors announced visitors. Light spilled from Toby's classroom, accompanied by familiar laughter, Beatrice's laughter, with a tone he hadn't heard in months. The sound froze him in place, his heart pounding against his ribs. For several seconds, he stood there, letting the reality sink in. Then, with the same careful movements he used when approaching troubled students, he edged closer to the window. The scene inside twisted his gut. Beatrice perched on Toby's desk, her hand resting on his chest, both of them sharing some private joke. Her face was animated, alive in a way it hadn't been at home for months. Toby leaned close, his literary pretension evident even in his posture, one hand playing with a strand of Beatrice's hair. "You're terrible," Beatrice was saying, her voice carrying through the thin glass. "He doesn't suspect a thing. You should see how he accepted the Maui invitation, like a puppy being offered a treat." Toby's response was too low to hear, but his smirk spoke volumes. He reached for something on his desk, papers, perhaps, or a manuscript. Whatever it was made Beatrice laugh again, harder this time. Vince's fingers pressed against the brick wall, searching for stability as his world tilted. The rough texture grounded him, kept him from bursting through the door. 20 years of marriage, of trust, of building a life together, reduced to a joke between lovers. His phone vibrated. A text from Katie. "Dad, tried calling earlier. Mom says you're not yourself lately. Maybe you should talk to someone?" The pieces clicked into place with brutal clarity. They weren't just having an affair. They were systematically dismantling his life, his relationships, his credibility. Each meditation retreat, every book club meeting, had been steps in their plan. Instead of confronting them, Vince retreated. His movements were mechanical as he drove across town to his sister Carol's house. She opened the door in her nursing scrubs, one look at his face telling her everything she needed to know. "Jesus, Vince," she said, pulling him inside. "What happened?" He followed her to the kitchen, watching as she pulled out a bottle of bourbon and 2 glasses. The familiar routine, so like their childhood after their father left, steadied him. "Remember when Dad left Mom?" Carol asked, pouring generous measures. "You were what, 14? You swore you'd never let anyone humiliate you like that." Vince took a long drink, letting the alcohol burn away the image of Beatrice on Toby's desk. "I found them at school, in his classroom. They were laughing about me, Carol. About how I don't suspect anything." "The Maui trip?" she asked, her nurse's intuition picking up details he hadn't shared. He nodded. "Probably where they plan to spring whatever trap they're setting. Beatrice has been laying groundwork, telling Katie I'm not myself, suggesting I need help. Gaslighting," Carol said, her voice hard, like Mom's second husband did to her. making everyone think she was crazy before he took everything. I've been documenting everything, Vince admitted. Every lie, every strange phone call, every meditation retreat. But seeing them together, he gripped his glass tighter. I wanted to confront them right there. And play into their hands? Carol shook her head. Rushing and angry won't help. You need to understand the whole picture first. What exactly are they planning? How deep does this go? Toby's the head of the English department, Vince said slowly, pieces connecting. He's been pushing for changes in the curriculum, suggesting combining English and psychology courses. If I were unstable, he'd be perfectly positioned to take over your programs, Carol finished. That manipulative bastard. You know this isn't his first time, right? Dawn, his ex-wife, she's a patient at my hospital. The stories she could tell you. Vince looked up sharply. Dawn's your patient? Can't share details, but Carol topped off their glasses. Let's just say you're not the first person Toby Hayes has tried to destroy. The question is, little brother, what are you going to do about it? They want to play games? Vince's voice was deadly quiet. Fine, let's play. But first, I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with. No mistakes, no rushed confrontations. They want to destroy me? They'll learn why my troubled students call me the Velvet Hammer, soft on the outside, absolutely ruthless when crossed. Carol studied him over her glass, recognizing the steel in his voice. Just remember, you've got allies. Dawn might be willing to talk, off the record. And that librarian, Marian? She sees everything that happens in that school. I need to protect Katie, Vince said. They're already poisoning her against me. Using my own daughter. His hand tightened on the glass until his knuckles whitened. Then be smarter than them, Carol advised. Document everything. Build your case. And when you move, make it count. No second chances, no mercy for traitors. Vince nodded, his teacher's gentle demeanor falling away to reveal something harder, more dangerous. 3 weeks until Maui. Time to show them what happens when you underestimate the quiet ones. They clinked glasses, sealing the moment. Outside, crickets chirped in the darkness, nature's soundtrack to the destruction of his marriage. But as Vince sat with his sister, planning his response, he felt something he hadn't experienced since discovering the truth, purpose. They thought him weak, controllable. By the time he was done, they'd understand exactly who they were dealing with. The Wednesday afternoon sun streamed through the psychology classroom windows as Vince dismissed his last class. Remember, he called out to his departing students, trauma doesn't just shape our actions. It reveals our true character. The irony wasn't lost on him as he settled behind his desk, opening his encrypted journal. For weeks now, he'd been documenting patterns, building a case with the same methodical precision he used to help troubled teens understand their behavior. His phone buzzed. Another book club text from Beatrice. Running late tonight. Don't wait up. The same message she sent every Wednesday when Toby had his extended office hours. Vince added it to his growing collection of evidence, noting the timestamp. A knock at his door interrupted his documentation. Dawn McKin stood in the doorway, her drama teacher's flair evident in her artistic scarf and bold jewelry. Got a minute, Vince? Or are you busy psychoanalyzing someone? He gestured to the chair across from his desk, studying his former friend's ex-wife. Always time for you, Dawn. Coffee. She settled into the chair, watching as he poured from his personal French press. Beatrice mentioned you've been distant lately. Worried about you. Did she? Vince handed her a cup, noting how she avoided his eyes. Interesting timing. I was actually hoping to talk to you about Toby. Dawn's hand trembled slightly as she took the coffee. What about him? You were married for what, 8 years? Vince kept his tone casual, professional. Before his first novel made him a minor literary celebrity. 7 years, 8 months, Dawn corrected, her voice bitter. Until he decided our marriage made better fiction than reality. Vince leaned forward, his teacher's mask firmly in place. Tell me about that. About how it started. Dawn's laugh was hollow. Like you're experiencing now? The sudden interest in new hobbies? The late-night phone calls? The careful campaign to make you look unstable? You noticed? I'm a drama teacher, Vince. I recognize a performance. She set down her coffee. Toby's great at playing the charming intellectual. He cultivates this image of the sensitive writer, understanding everyone's deepest feelings. But he's really just a collector of other people's stories. He uses them in his novels, then moves on to fresh material. Vince pulled out a notebook, the same one he used for student consultations. When did you first suspect something was wrong? The note-taking, Don said immediately. He started recording everything, conversations, arguments, intimate moments. Claimed it was for his writing process. Later, I found out he was documenting my emotional instability for the divorce proceedings. By then, he'd already convinced everyone I was having a breakdown, like Beatrice is doing with me. Vince mused, making notes. The hints to Katie about my mental health, the suggestions that I need help. It's his pattern, Dawn confirmed. He finds someone stable, successful, respected, someone whose life he can, appropriate. Then he orchestrates their destruction while recording every detail for his books. Vince's pen moved across the page, documenting everything. The meditation retreats began 6 months ago. Same time Toby announced his new novel deal. Let me guess, the retreats have no online presence? No contact numbers? Don's smile was knowing. Check the Conway in off Highway 23. That's where they probably meet. Toby's creature of habit. You never warned me, Vince said quietly. When you first suspected them, Don's face flushed. Who would have believed me? The bitter ex-wife? Besides, Toby's careful. He documents everything, builds his case slowly. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, it's too late, Vince finished. Except this time, he chose the wrong subject to study. Be careful, Vince, Dawn warned. Toby's not just after your wife. He wants your whole life, your career, your reputation, everything that makes you who you are. He's probably got files filled with evidence of your instability, like the files I've been keeping on them. Vince's smile was cold. 20 years teaching troubled teens teaches you a lot about documentation, about patterns, about how to handle people who think they're smarter than you. Dawn studied him, seeing past the gentle teacher facade to something harder. You're not going to just let them destroy you, are you? Let's just say I learned from my father's mistakes, Vince replied, closing his notebook. He let my mother's affair break him. I prefer to break those who betray me. A knock interrupted them. Marianne Orr, the school librarian, stood in the doorway, her usually timid demeanor replaced by determination. Mr. Levine? I think there's something you need to see. Dawn rose, squeezing Vince's shoulder as she passed. Remember what I said about the Conway Inn? And Vince? Make them regret choosing you as their subject. Marianne waited until Dawn left before closing the door. Her hands clutched a manila folder. I've been organizing the reference section, she began, her voice low. They didn't know I was there. In the stacks. Beatrice and Toby? Vince prompted gently, using his counselor's voice. Marianne nodded, placing the folder on his desk. They were discussing his new novel. I heard things. About you. About their plans. She opened the folder, revealing photocopied pages of handwritten notes. Toby left these in a book he returned. I made copies before reshelving it. Vince scanned the pages, his expression hardening. Character sketches, plot outlines, dialogue snippets, all clearly based on his life, his marriage. But twisted, darkened, painting him as unstable, potentially dangerous. There's more, Marianne continued. They meet in the reference section sometimes, when they think everyone's gone. Yesterday, I heard them laughing about the Maui trip, about how you'd never see it coming. See what coming, Marianne? She wrung her hands. They're working on something together, not just the affair. Toby's new novel, it's about a married couple's twisted games. He's using your life for material, but he's changing everything, making you the villain. Vince added the photocopied pages to his growing file. Thank you, Marianne. I may need you to repeat what you've told me someday. Would you be willing? They think no one sees them, she replied, straightening her glasses. But I've worked in this library for 23 years. I see everything. And what they're doing, it's wrong. After she left, Vince returned to his journal, adding new entries with methodical precision. The pattern was clear now: the meditation retreats, the book club meetings, the late-night phone calls. Each piece carefully orchestrated, each betrayal documented for Toby's literary ambitions. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Katie. "Dad, sorry I haven't called much. Mom says you're dealing with some things. Maybe you should talk to Mr. Hayes? She says he's worried about you too." Vince's response was carefully measured. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Looking forward to your next visit." He added the exchange to his evidence file, noting how they were using his daughter against him. The school emptied around him as evening approached. Through his classroom window, he watched Beatrice's car pull out of the parking lot, followed 10 minutes later by Toby's Audi. Right on schedule, like every Wednesday. He opened his laptop, pulling up the Conwayans website. Within minutes, he had confirmation. Regular Wednesday bookings under a false name, matching Beatrice's book club schedule perfectly. Another piece of evidence, another nail in their coffin. His phone rang, Carol checking in. "You doing okay, little brother?" "Better than okay," he replied, his voice cold with certainty. "I know their patterns now, their habits, their weaknesses. They think they're writing my story, Carol, but they have no idea who's really holding the pen. Just remember what we talked about," she cautioned. "No rushed confrontations. Trust me," Vince said, watching the sun set over the empty school parking lot. "When I make my move, there won't be anything rushed about it. They want to study human behavior? I'll give them a master class they'll never forget." He closed his journal, locking away the evidence of their betrayal. In 3 weeks, they'd be in Maui, where Beatrice and Toby planned to spring their trap. But like any good teacher, Vince believed in being prepared. And he had a lesson plan they'd never see coming. Vince Levine's office had become a command center. 3 monitors displayed different aspects of his investigation, one showing security footage from carefully hidden cameras throughout his home, another cycling through recorded conversations, and the third tracking patterns in Beatrice and Toby's movements. "You've been busy," Carol observed, studying the setup. She picked up one of the dozens of notebooks filled with his precise handwriting. "Maybe too busy. Kitty called me yesterday, worried about you." "Let me guess. Beatrice suggested she reach out?" Vince didn't look up from his computer. "They're using my own daughter as a weapon, Carol. Every conversation, every text, carefully designed to paint me as unstable." "How long have you been recording them?" 2 months. He pulled up a video file. "Watch this." The footage showed Beatrice in their kitchen, phone pressed to her ear. "He's getting worse, Katie. Always in his office, barely sleeping. Mr. Hayes suggested he might need professional help, but you know how your father is about therapy." Carol's expression hardened. "The manipulation is almost impressive." "Oh, it gets better." Vince switched to another file. "This is from last week. Beatrice and Toby appeared, meeting in an empty classroom. Everything's arranged for Maui," Toby said, pulling her close. "The lawyers have the papers ready. Once we document his breakdown, the school board will have no choice." "What about Katie?" "She's already convinced he's unstable." "Your performance has been masterful, darling." The concerned wife, watching her husband spiral. Toby kissed her neck. This chapter practically writes itself. A knock interrupted their viewing. Marianne stood in the doorway, clutching a manila envelope. The librarian's usual timidity was gone, replaced by quiet anger. "I found something you need to see," she said, closing the door behind her. They were in the reference section again. I recorded them." She pulled out her phone, hands shaking slightly. "They didn't know I was reshelving in the next aisle." The audio was clear. Toby's voice came through first. "The novel's almost finished. A psychological thriller about a respected teacher's descent into paranoid obsession. Critics will assume it's fiction, but the best stories come from real life." Beatrice's laugh followed. "And the real ending will be even better." Poor Vince, alone in Hawaii, having a very public breakdown. So tragic when respected professionals lose their minds. "You've been invaluable, Marianne," Vince said, adding the recording to his growing collection. "They never suspected you were watching." 23 years in that library," Marianne replied, straightening her glasses. "People forget I'm there. Like when I found the draft chapters in Toby's laptop bag. She pulled papers from the envelope. He left it unattended during lunch. These pages, they're about you, Mr. Levine. How he's twisting everything. Vince scanned the pages, his expression darkening. The novel painted him as increasingly unstable, potentially dangerous. Every real interaction transformed into evidence of mental deterioration. They're working together on this, Marianne continued. I've seen them editing scenes. Your wife. She provides details about your private life, your vulnerabilities. They're building the story around destroying you. Not just the story, Carol interjected, reading over Vince's shoulder. Your whole life. These fictional scenes match the concerns Beatrice has been sharing about your mental health. Classic gaslighting, Vince noted clinically. They're creating a narrative where any reaction I have will be seen as proof of instability. He turned to his sister. Remember how Mom tried to tell people about Dad's affair? How everyone thought grief was making her paranoid? Until he left with his secretary, taking half their savings, Carol's voice was bitter. History's not repeating itself, little brother. Not this time. No, it's not. Vince pulled up another file. Because I've documented everything. Every meeting, every phone call, every manipulation. While they've been building their story, I've been building the truth. His phone buzzed. Another text from Katie. Dad, please talk to someone. Mom's really worried. And Mr. Hayes said some of your students have noticed changes in your behavior. They're isolating you, Marianne observed. Turning everyone against you before you can expose them. That's their mistake. Vince's smile was cold. They think I'm alone, desperate, unstable. They don't realize I have allies. He gestured to Marianne and Carol. People who've seen through their act. Dawn McCann called me, Marianne added. She's willing to go on record about how Toby did the same thing to her. Used their marriage for his first novel, then discredited her when she tried to object. 3 weeks until Maui, Carol noted. They'll expect you to break before then. Let them think that. Vince began organizing his evidence. They want to write my story? Fine. But I'm not their character to control. And they're about to learn the difference between fiction and reality. The next few weeks passed in meticulous preparation. Every move calculated, every reaction carefully measured. Vince played his role perfectly, the increasingly isolated husband, the concerned teacher showing subtle signs of strain. Let them think their plan was working. His hidden cameras captured everything. Beatrice's late-night calls coordinating their plan. Toby's smug assurance as he wrote his novel, transforming Vince's life into his next literary triumph. Their secret meetings in empty classrooms and quiet corners, plotting his destruction. The school became a stage, every interaction part of their performance. Concerned colleagues watched him carefully, noting behaviors that would later support Beatrice's claims. Only a select few, Marianne, Dawn, his sister Carol, knew the truth. You're really going through with the trip? Dawn asked during one of their secret meetings. Walking into their trap? Their trap becomes my stage, Vince replied, showing her his preparations. Everything documented, everything recorded. Let them think they're the writers of this story. The final piece came together 3 days before their departure. Carrie Myers, the private investigator he'd hired, delivered a comprehensive file. Hotel receipts, text messages, emails, everything documenting their affair and their conspiracy. They're good, Carrie admitted, careful about electronic trails. But they got sloppy once they thought they had you cornered. Vince added the file to his collection. 20 years of teaching had taught him patience. Understanding human behavior wasn't just his profession, it was his armor. And like any good teacher, he believed in preparing thorough lessons. Let them think he was breaking. Let them believe their story was unfolding perfectly. In Maui, they'd learn who was really in control of this narrative. The 4 seasons Maui rose before them like a promise of paradise, but Vince saw only the stage it represented. Beatrice had been distracted throughout their arrival, constantly checking her phone while maintaining a facade of anniversary excitement. The Ocean View Suite, she announced as they entered their room. Only the best for 20 years together. Her smile was practiced, professional. The same smile she'd worn while systematically destroying his life. It's perfect, Vince replied, matching her performance. He'd learned from watching her, perfecting the art of saying one thing while meaning another. Everything's exactly as it should be. Their first dinner was an exercise in theatrical precision. Beatrice wore a new dress, expensive, like everything else she'd bought recently. Her phone buzzed repeatedly throughout the meal, each message making her more distracted. "Work emergency?" Vince asked mildly, noting how she angled the screen away from him. "Just the meditation group," she lied smoothly. "They're planning another retreat." Her smile flickered. "Tomorrow, darling. Tomorrow I'll explain everything." "Of course." He sipped his wine, watching her discomfort grow. "Take all the time you need." After dinner, Beatrice claimed a headache and retreated to their suite. Vince waited 30 minutes before making his way to the hotel's business center, where Carrie Myers waited with a USB drive. The private investigator looked out of place among the resort's luxury, but his information was worth more than any amenity. "Everything's here," Carrie said, handing over the drive. "Texts, emails, hotel receipts. The whole conspiracy." "Show me." Carrie pulled up files on his laptop. "They've been planning this for months. The meditation retreats were planning sessions. They've got a whole team, lawyers, doctors willing to testify about your mental state, even statements from concerned colleagues. And Toby's position? He wants your job. Once you're discredited, he'll be the perfect candidate to take over the psychology department. Combine it with his English courses, create some new program." "He's already drafted the proposal." Vince studied the evidence, his expression unchanged. "And the local arrangements? They've booked a private beach cabana for tomorrow morning. That's where they'll confront you." Carrie pulled up a blueprint. "One entrance, isolated location. They're expecting you to break down, make a scene. Everything's arranged to document your unstable behavior." "Perfect." Vince pocketed the drive. "You have the other preparations in place?" Carrie nodded. "Everything's ready. But listen, Vince, I've seen setups like this before. They're usually pretty confident by this point, thinking their target's too broken to fight back." "They should be confident," Vince replied, his voice cold. "Confidence makes people sloppy. Makes them forget that sometimes the prey is actually the predator. Just remember, they're expecting a scene, a breakdown. If you stay too calm, they'll adapt their strategy," Vince finished. "Don't worry. I know exactly what performance they're expecting. 20 years teaching psychology means I understand how to play to people's expectations." Back in the suite, Beatrice pretended to be asleep. Vince watched her measured breathing, noting how she checked her phone the moment she thought he was in the bathroom. More messages from Toby, no doubt. Last-minute adjustments to their script. He pulled out his own phone, sending a series of coded texts. Everything was in position. Tomorrow, they'd learn the difference between writing a story and living one. The morning arrived with practiced inevitability. Beatrice was already dressed when Vince woke, her nervousness masked by determined efficiency. "I thought we could have breakfast on the beach," she suggested, her tone carefully casual. "There's a private cabana with an amazing view." "Lead the way," Vince replied, following her path like a student of human nature observing a specimen. Every step she took was choreographed, every gesture calculated. The beach cabana stood isolated from the main resort, exactly as Carrie had described. Toby Hayes waited inside, looking every inch the literary success in his expensive linen shirt and carefully cultivated stubble. "Vince," he greeted, managing to sound both concerned and condescending. "I hope you understand why I'm here." "Oh, I understand perfectly." Vince settled into a chair, noting their positions, their prepared expressions. "You have something to tell me." Beatrice moved to stand beside Toby, their unity now openly displayed. "We're worried about you, Vince. Everyone is. Your behavior lately has been concerning," Toby finished, reaching for a thick file. "Your colleagues, your students, even Katie, they've all noticed changes." The file landed on the table between them. Vince glanced at its contents, carefully selected text messages, witness statements from concerned faculty members, documentation of his supposed erratic behavior. "Sign the divorce papers," Beatrice said coldly, dropping all pretense of concern. "Leave quietly, or we'll make sure everyone knows about your psychological issues." "Think about Katie," She's already worried about you. She'll understand it's for the best, Toby added. A clean break, before your condition deteriorates further. Vince studied them, seeing their confidence, their absolute certainty in their control of the narrative. Interesting story, he said quietly, but I prefer the original version. Before they could respond, he pulled out his laptop. Let's start with the affair, he began, playing the first video. 6 months of secret meetings, all recorded. Then we'll move on to the planning sessions. How you orchestrated everything, step by step. Their expressions shifted from confidence to confusion, then to dawning horror as more videos played. Beatrice and Toby in his classroom, laughing about their manipulation. Late-night phone calls plotting his destruction. Meetings with lawyers, planning how to use his supposed mental instability against him. You've been recording us? Beatrice stumbled, knocking over a glass of champagne. They prepared to celebrate their victory. I'm a student of human behavior, Vince reminded them. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize the patterns? The same patterns Toby used on Dawn McCann, transforming her life into his first novel. Those recordings are illegal, Toby blustered. But his literary confidence was cracking. Actually, they're not. My house, my classroom, all legal surveillance zones. But the real evidence? Vince pulled out Carrie's USB drive. Every email, every text, every hotel receipt. Your whole conspiracy, documented by professionals. Did you really think I'd come to Hawaii without understanding exactly what you'd planned? It's your word against ours, Beatrice tried, but her voice shook. Everyone already thinks you're unstable, do they? Vince smiled coldly. Marianne has quite a different story. So does Dawn McCann, and Jerry Kramer, and all the other faculty members who saw through your performance. They're all very interested in how you've been orchestrating this little drama. The color drained from Toby's face. You can't prove. I can prove everything. Vince's voice was steel-wrapped in velvet. Every manipulation, every lie, every attempt to gaslight me. You wanted to write my story? Congratulations. You've written yourself into a corner. He stood, his calm demeanor more terrifying than any rage they'd anticipated. The divorce papers are on the table, but they're not the ones you prepared. These ones include full disclosure of your conspiracy, your affair, and Toby's pattern of exploiting personal relationships for his novels. Sign them, and this stays relatively quiet. Refuse. You're bluffing, Toby attempted, but his literary swagger had evaporated. Vince played another video, them laughing about using his life for Toby's book, planning each detail of his destruction. Still think I'm bluffing? This is just a preview of what every publisher, every colleague, every friend will see. Your choice. Beatrice reached for the papers with trembling hands. You planned this all along? I learned from the best, Vince replied. You taught me so much about performance, about playing a role, about letting your target think they're in control. He turned to Toby. You wanted to write about psychological manipulation? Congratulations. You've lived it. As they signed the papers, their carefully constructed narrative crumbling around them, Vince reflected on the lessons he'd taught troubled teens for years. About consequences, about truth, about the difference between manipulating others and truly understanding human nature. They thought him weak, controllable, easy to destroy. Instead, they'd learned what his students had always known. Sometimes the quietest predators are the most dangerous. And betrayal, like every other human behavior, comes with its own inevitable psychology of consequences. The USB drive's contents appeared on the large screen in Principal Matthews' office, silencing everyone present. The school board members leaned forward, watching Beatrice and Toby plot Vince's destruction, their casual cruelty evident in every frame. This is just the beginning, Vince stated, his voice steady as he addressed the emergency board meeting. Every manipulation, every lie, documented and preserved. Board Chairman Roberts removed his glasses, rubbing his eyes. The timestamps on these recordings go back 6 months, Vince confirmed, since I first noticed the changes in Beatrice's behavior. But the conspiracy goes deeper. He nodded to Dawn McCann, who stepped forward with her own file. Toby Hayes has a pattern, Dawn began, her drama teacher's presence commanding attention. He did the same thing to me 5 years ago. Used our marriage as material for his first novel, then discredited me when I objected. She distributed copies of old emails, court documents, and manuscript drafts. He transforms people's lives into his fiction, destroying them in the process. Principal Matthews studied the evidence, her expression hardening. These recent faculty concerns about Mr. Levine's mental health were orchestrated. Marianne interrupted from her seat near the door. The librarian's typically quiet demeanor had vanished. I overheard them planning everything in the reference section. They were deliberately isolating him, making him appear unstable. Jerry Kramer, the guidance counselor, stood next. Several students came to me worried about Mr. Levine. Now I understand why. Mrs. Levine had been telling them he was going through something difficult, setting the stage for his supposed breakdown. The manipulation was comprehensive, Vince explained, changing the screen to display a timeline. Beatrice convinced our daughter Katie I needed psychiatric help. She turned our friends against me, all while she and Toby documented everything for his new novel. More evidence appeared on screen: text messages, email chains, surveillance footage. Each piece revealing another layer of betrayal, another calculated move in their literary game. The meditation retreats? Board member Phillips asked. Never existed. Vince pulled up hotel receipts. They were meeting at the Conway Inn, planning my destruction. Every book club meeting, every spiritual retreat, documented and verified. Don stepped forward again. When Toby did this to me, he was more careful, but success made him sloppy. He kept everything: notes, recordings, drafts, all describing how they would systematically destroy Vince's reputation and career. The board members exchanged glances as more evidence mounted. Principal Matthews' face darkened with each new revelation. Mr. Hayes's actions violate multiple ethical guidelines, Chairman Roberts noted. Using student interactions in his novels, manipulating faculty relationships, and attempting to force out a tenured teacher through fraudulent mental health claims, Jerry Kramer added. As guidance counselor, I find this particularly disturbing. Vince maintained his professional demeanor, though his eyes revealed controlled fury. They didn't just attack me. They poisoned my relationship with my daughter, manipulated my students, and corrupted the trust of this institution. There's more, Marianne said quietly. She placed a laptop on the conference table. Toby left this in the library last week. His new novel, complete with notes about how they plan to use Vince's breakdown in Hawaii as the dramatic climax. The board members read in silence, their expressions shifting from shock to disgust. They really thought you wouldn't notice? Principal Matthews asked Vince. They confused my patience for weakness, he replied. A common mistake among people who think they're the smartest ones in the room. Don nodded grimly. Toby's favorite trick, convincing everyone his target is mentally unstable. He did it to me, tried to do it to Vince. But this time, she gestured to the mountain of evidence. This time he chose the wrong person to destroy. The meeting continued for hours as more faculty members came forward. Teachers, administrators, even custodial staff, all sharing pieces of the puzzle they'd witnessed. The picture that emerged was damning. A systematic campaign to destroy a respected educator for literary material. What do you want from the board? Chairman Roberts finally asked. Vince's response was measured, his psychology teacher's insight evident. I want the truth documented. I want every person they manipulated to understand how they were used. And I want to ensure Toby Hayes never exploits another person's life for his fiction. The board's decision was unanimous. Toby's actions violated every ethical standard they held. His pattern of exploiting personal relationships for his novels, combined with his attempts to manipulate student and faculty mental health concerns, made his position untenable. As the meeting concluded, Dawn caught Vince's eye. You did what I couldn't, she said quietly. You exposed him. We exposed him, Vince corrected. Your testimony, Marianne's evidence, Jerry's support. The truth needed multiple voices. Walking to his car later, Vince checked his phone. 3 missed calls from Katie. His daughter was finally ready to hear the truth, and he had every piece of evidence needed to show her exactly how her mother had manipulated them both. Katie's hands trembled as she watched the video playing on Vince's laptop in the resort's conference room. On screen, Beatrice and Toby laughed about using her concern against her father. "It's perfect," Toby's voice declared. The devoted daughter, worried about Daddy's mental health. "We couldn't have planned it better." "Katie's always been Daddy's little girl," Beatrice replied, her voice cruel with amusement. "Now we're using that love to destroy him. Poetic, isn't it?" The screen went black. Katie sat in silence, tears streaming down her face. "I kept thinking about your depression," she finally said, her voice breaking. "But they were making you doubt yourself on purpose." "Making me doubt you." Vince maintained his composure, though watching his daughter's pain tested his control. "They used your love as a weapon," he said quietly. "Used your concern to further their narrative. Mom called me every week." Katie's hands clenched into fists, telling me how worried she was about you. How Mr. Hayes had noticed changes in your behavior. "I thought." She looked up, her eyes filled with guilt. "I thought I was helping by pushing you to get help." "That was their strategy," Vince explained, pulling up more evidence. "Every call, every text, all designed to isolate me. To make any reaction seem like proof of instability." New footage played, Beatrice and Toby in his classroom, planning their manipulation. "Katie's the key," Toby said, his literary pretension evident even in casual conversation. "If she believes her father's unstable, everyone else will follow. The devoted daughter's concern becomes our evidence." "Stop," Katie whispered. "I can't. I trusted them. Trusted Mom. And Mr. Hayes was always so concerned, so helpful." "Because you were a character in their story," Vince replied, his teacher's insight gentle but firm. "They needed your performance to make their plot work." Katie stood abruptly, pacing the conference room. "I transferred colleges to be closer to Mom," she said bitterly, "because she said you were pushing everyone away. But she was the one." She turned to her father. "How long have you known?" "I suspected for 6 months. Started gathering evidence 4 months ago. The cameras, the recordings, everything documented and verified. Why didn't you tell me?" Vince's response was measured. "They had already positioned me as paranoid, unstable. If I had approached you with accusations, it would have confirmed their narrative. I needed irrefutable proof. Like the videos of them laughing about using me." Katie's voice cracked. "About turning me against you? I protected you the only way I could, by gathering evidence they couldn't dismiss or explain away." Katie collapsed back into her chair. "What happens now?" "The school board met this morning. Toby's position is terminated. Your mother." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The divorce papers are signed. Their attempt to paint me as unstable backfired when I revealed their conspiracy." "I should have seen it," Katie whispered. "Should have questioned why Mom suddenly wanted me to transfer schools, move closer to her." "They were master manipulators," Vince reminded her. "They used your love, your concern, against both of us. But now you know the truth." Katie's phone buzzed, another message from Beatrice. She turned it off without reading it. "I need time," she said quietly, "to process everything." "But Dad," she met his eyes, "I want to transfer again. To a school closer to you." The next weeks brought more revelations. The school board meeting was indeed brutal, with Toby's history of exploitation laid bare. Beatrice's attempts to have Vince declared mentally unfit disintegrated under the weight of his evidence. Katie moved back, enrolling in a college near her father. Each day brought new understanding of how deeply the manipulation had run, how carefully they had orchestrated every detail. But watching his daughter process the betrayal, Vince knew his real victory wasn't in exposing their plot. It was in preserving the evidence of truth for those who needed to understand how thoroughly they'd been deceived. 1 year later, Vince arranged files on his desk in the department head's office. The position Toby had coveted now belonged to him, earned through merit rather than manipulation. A framed photo caught his eye, Katie at her new college, both of them smiling genuinely. She had transferred schools, understanding now why proximity to family mattered. Their weekly dinners had become a ritual of rebuilding, each conversation strengthening their restored trust. A knock at his door revealed Elena Leonard, Katie's former guidance counselor. "The board approved your curriculum changes," she announced, entering with a stack of papers. They were particularly impressed with the new ethics component. "Experience is the best teacher," Vince replied, gesturing for her to sit. "Though some lessons come at a higher price than others." Elena settled into the chair, her presence bringing a warmth to the office that had been missing in his marriage's final years. "Have you heard the latest? Beatrice and Toby moved to Chicago. Apparently, he's struggling to find a publisher for his new novel." Publishers are surprisingly ethical when they discover an author exploits real people for material. Vince allowed himself a small smile. Dawn McCann's testimony helped with that. "The students miss her in drama class," Elena noted. "But her new position at the community theater seems to suit her better. Away from certain literary influences." Their conversations had become a comfortable part of Vince's routine. Elena had seen through Beatrice's manipulation early, though she had lacked the evidence to prove it. Her quiet support during the aftermath had evolved into something deeper, more genuine than he'd experienced in years. "Katie called this morning," Vince mentioned, organizing his lesson plans. "She's presenting her psychology thesis next week. Wants us both to attend." Elena's smile was warm. "Us? You've been part of her healing too," he reminded her, helping her understand how manipulation works, how to recognize the signs. "She's stronger for having weathered this," Elena observed. "You both are." A notification popped up on Vince's computer, an email from his publisher. The book he'd written about psychological manipulation and gaslighting was gaining traction in academic circles. Not a novel, like Toby's works, but a scholarly examination of how predators exploit trust and twist narratives. "Any word from Chicago?" Elena asked carefully. "Beatrice sent Katie a birthday card. Return address is an apartment, not the luxury condos they planned." Apparently, Toby's literary reputation suffered when his methods came to light. Elena studied him, noting the absence of bitterness in his voice. "You never wanted revenge," she realized. "Just truth. Revenge is letting someone else control your narrative," Vince replied, drawing on years of teaching troubled teens. "I wanted everyone to understand their own story, free from manipulation." Including Katie. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on honest conversations and shared understanding. Unlike his marriage to Beatrice, there were no hidden agendas, no performances for an unseen audience. The last page of his journal, where he documented everything, now held a different kind of truth. The best revenge isn't about destruction. It's about reclaiming your own story. Elena read the line over his shoulder. "Is that how your book ends?" "It's how this chapter ends," Vince corrected, closing the journal. "The next one is still being written." Outside his office, students passed between classes. Some stopped to wave. The psychology teacher who had turned his own experience into lessons about trust, manipulation, and the courage to face truth. The photos on his wall told the new story. Katie thriving at her new school, Dawn McCann directing community theater, Marianne or receiving an award for library excellence. And in a recent edition, Vince and Elena at a faculty dinner. Their genuine happiness a stark contrast to the performed perfection of his past. He had learned, and now taught others, that strength isn't in destroying those who betray you. It's in standing firm in your truth, protecting those you love, and building something genuine from the ashes of deception. The bell rang, signaling the start of his advanced psychology class. Today's lesson: understanding manipulation and recovery. His students would learn not from literary fiction, but from hard-earned truth. It was, he knew, the most powerful lesson he could teach. Epilogue. 5 years later. The Psychology Today magazine lay open on Vince Levine's desk, his latest article prominently featured. Patterns of manipulation. Identifying and confronting psychological exploitation. The piece had garnered significant attention in academic circles, particularly his analysis of how predators use their victims' closest relationships as weapons. Another speaking engagement request, Elena announced, entering his home office with a cup of coffee. Now his wife of 2 years, she'd supported his mission to transform personal trauma into professional insight. Stanford this time. They want you to address their psychology department about gaslighting in academic environments. Vince accepted the coffee, his wedding ring catching the light, different from the one he'd worn during his 20 years with Beatrice. This marriage, built on honesty rather than manipulation, had shown him how genuine relationships could heal old wounds. "Katie sent an interesting email this morning," he said, pulling up his daughter's message. "Apparently, she ran into Beatrice in Chicago." Elena settled into the chair across from him, concern crossing her face. "How did that go?" "About as well as you'd expect." He turned his laptop, showing her the email. "Beatrice is teaching freshman English at a community college. No more meditation retreats or designer clothes." According to Katie, she looked tired. The email detailed more than just a chance encounter. Katie, now finishing her PhD in clinical psychology, had found herself face-to-face with her mother at an academic conference. Beatrice had been presenting a paper on modern literature and identity, a far cry from the glamorous life she'd envisioned when leaving with Toby Hayes. "What about him?" Elena asked, though they both knew Toby's fate. "Still trying to publish," Vince replied, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "Katie says he's self-publishing under a pseudonym now. The literary world has a long memory for ethical violations. No major publisher will touch him after what happened." Their carefully orchestrated plan had backfired spectacularly. The evidence Vince had gathered, the recordings, the emails, the witness testimonies, had spread through academic circles. Toby's pattern of exploiting personal relationships for his novels had become a cautionary tale in publishing ethics. "Dawn's new play is opening next month," Elena mentioned, changing the subject. "She's adapted her experience into a theater piece about artistic exploitation. She wants us all to attend." Dawn McCann had transformed her trauma into triumph. After testifying about Toby's manipulation, she'd found her voice in community theater. Her productions often explored themes of truth, betrayal, and redemption, playing to sold-out audiences at the Regional Arts Center where she now served as artistic director. Vince opened his calendar, marking the play's opening night. Is Marianne still doing the dramaturg work with her? And running the theater's research library? Elena smiled. Remember how quiet she used to be? Now she's teaching workshops on recognizing manipulation in professional relationships. The students love her. The conspiracy that was meant to destroy Vince had instead created an unexpected alliance. The witnesses to Beatrice and Toby's manipulation had found strength in supporting each other. Jerry Kramer, the former guidance counselor, now collaborated with Vince on developing educational programs about psychological abuse. Marianne Orr had transformed from a timid librarian into a respected advocate for workplace ethics. His phone buzzed, a text from Carol. His sister had never lost her protective instincts. "Guess who's applying for food stamps in Chicago?" she wrote, attaching a link to a public assistance database. "Karma takes its time, but it never forgets." The message brought no joy, only clinical confirmation of natural consequences. Beatrice and Toby's dreams of literary fame had dissolved into a grinding reality. Their attempt to exploit Vince's life had cost them their own comfortable existence. Katie mentioned something else, Vince said, returning to his daughter's email. Beatrice tried to apologize. Said she realizes now what she threw away. Elena's expression hardened. "After 5 years? After trying to destroy you?" Katie told her it was too late for apologies. Vince's voice held no bitterness, only acceptance. Some betrayals can't be undone. Some trust, once broken, stays broken. He opened his desk drawer, pulling out his old journal, the one where he documented their conspiracy. Its pages held a different significance now. What began as evidence had become source material for his academic work on manipulation and recovery. Principal Matthews called, Elena mentioned. "The school board wants to expand your ethics curriculum to other districts. Your case study on identifying manipulation in professional environments is becoming standard training material." The irony wasn't lost on them. Toby had wanted to use Vince's life for a novel. Instead, Vince had transformed their betrayal into something more valuable, educational tools to protect others from similar exploitation. A framed photo on his desk showed their blended family at last year's Christmas gathering. Katie stood between Vince and Elena, her engagement ring visible as she hugged them both. Her fiancé, a fellow psychology student who understood her journey, stood nearby. The genuine happiness in their faces contrasted sharply with the staged perfection of older family photos. You never asked for revenge, Elena observed, studying the picture. Even when you had every right to destroy them, revenge would have meant playing their game, Vince replied, drawing on years of teaching troubled teens. I preferred to change the rules. Show the truth, protect the vulnerable, and let natural consequences take their course. The consequences had indeed been natural and far-reaching. Beatrice and Toby's comfortable lives had unraveled not through active destruction, but through the simple exposure of truth. Their academic reputations, carefully built on manipulation and exploitation, had crumbled under scrutiny. Last month's faculty newsletter had featured an ironic update. The university where Toby had once dreamed of teaching creative writing had instead adopted Vince's case study in their ethics curriculum. Students now learned about manipulation and exploitation using real examples from Toby's failed literary career. Jerry sent over the latest survey results, Elena said, pulling up her tablet. The anti-gaslighting protocols you developed have reduced reported cases of psychological manipulation in partner schools by 60%. The numbers validated what Vince had always believed. Education was the best defense against exploitation. His experience had become a shield for others, protecting them from similar manipulation. Katie's email had one final detail about Beatrice. During their chance encounter, his ex-wife had asked about the family photos on Katie's phone. The images showed holidays, graduations, family dinners, moments of genuine connection that Beatrice had sacrificed for a fantasy of literary glamour with Toby. The thing about consequences, Vince mused, closing his laptop, is that they teach the lessons we refuse to learn any other way. He picked up his Psychology Today article, reading the final paragraph. The ultimate protection against psychological manipulation isn't suspicion or isolation. It's the cultivation of authentic relationships built on genuine trust. When we understand the patterns of exploitation, we can create environments where manipulation withers while honest connections flourish. Outside his office, voices drifted up from the kitchen. Katie had arrived early for their weekly family dinner, bringing her fiancé and the latest draft of her dissertation. The house would soon fill with the sounds of genuine laughter, honest conversations, and the warm chaos of real family life. 5 years had transformed victims into advocates, witnesses into educators, and pain into purpose. While Beatrice and Toby struggled in Chicago, barely holding onto low-level academic positions, their intended targets had built something stronger from the ashes of betrayal. Vince's new book sat ready for publication. Beyond Betrayal, Transforming Manipulation into Educational Opportunity. The dedication page read, "For every person who chose truth over performance, authenticity over manipulation, and growth over revenge. Your story matters." The final page of his old journal, now archived in his research files, still held the truth he discovered through years of processing trauma. The best revenge isn't about destruction. It's about reclaiming your own story and helping others protect theirs. Elena stood, offering her hand. Ready for dinner? Katie's bringing that couple from her support group, the ones dealing with academic manipulation at their university. Vince nodded, taking her hand. They had learned that healing multiplied when shared with others. While Beatrice and Toby's world had shrunk to desperate attempts at relevance in Chicago, their victims had expanded into a network of support, education, and advocacy. The doorbell rang, more guests arriving for dinner. Another evening of genuine connections, honest conversations, and the quiet satisfaction of lives well lived. In the end, that was the greatest consequence of all, the contrast between authentic relationships and the hollow performances Beatrice and Toby had chosen instead. As they headed downstairs to greet their guests, Vince reflected on the true meaning of justice. Sometimes, the most ruthless response to betrayal wasn't destruction, but simply stepping aside and letting natural consequences unfold while building something better from the wreckage. In Chicago, Beatrice and Toby might be contemplating their losses, but here, surrounded by genuine love and purpose, Vince and his allies had found something far more valuable than revenge. They'd found truth, healing, and the power to protect others from similar harm. The story hadn't ended with exposure or punishment. It had evolved into a legacy of education, prevention, and authentic connection. That, Vince knew, was the most fitting consequence of all. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.